Suppose our worship services are suspended. There's an attempt to lock us down again. Like, well, the premier says we got to close our churches, so we're closing our churches down again. We're going to do that? Now, the first time we did it, you know why? Because nobody knew what was going on. And out of respect and deference for people that were in difficult positions that didn't have sufficient information, we're like, okay, we'll close her down. I mean, we were experiencing something that was unprecedented. But I think it's true, and this might bother some of you. You'll have to deal with that on your own. But if it wasn't for the media and it wasn't for the news, frankly, I wouldn't even know coronavirus existed. I don't know of anybody that's died. I've heard of a few people that are sick. I don't know anybody that's died. They might say, well, you're not telling the truth. We had someone in our church accuse me of lying, that I knew of 20 COVID cases in our church. Are you kidding me? I got my hand in the Bible, folks. Don't accuse me of being a liar. I don't know of anybody that's died of COVID-19. But the media will tell you, mass deaths. It's like the Spanish flu. There's people dying all around us. The case numbers are going through the roof. And then you go outside and you're like, where? I don't see it. You know, I listened to some video testimony of some people that are probably dead by now, but they were older folks, 90 years old, and they'd lived through the Spanish flu back at the beginning of the last century. And they said as little children, they didn't know better. They went outside and, there's a big pile of boxes down the street. And they'd run up and down these boxes and their mothers would come out horrified. Get off those boxes, those are caskets. The horse carts would come through the streets and pick up dead bodies every morning. That's not what we're seeing. Now, could it have been what we've seen? Yeah. Could it go that way? Sure. We haven't seen it yet. Everybody's supposed to throw on masks. Get your mask on. And the numbers keep going up, 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 up. And it's our fault because we're not doing enough. Meanwhile, let's not talk about the people that are jumping off bridges or stringing themselves up in their garages because they've lost their businesses or jobs. Let's not talk about the children that are being raised by horrible parents who now have them 24/7 and are abusing them. Let's not talk about all the Nutbars that are now full-time on the computer trying to seduce and lure children through various forms of sexual abuse. Let's not talk about people who have had to close down their businesses. Let's not talk about that. Let's not listen to the historians. Let's not listen to the clergymen. Let's not listen to the psychiatrists, the sociologists. Let's just listen exclusively to a paid technocrat whose sole interest is in physical health, and just focus on that every single day. Just inundate you with articles and tweets and information and fear over and over and over again, month after month after month. This is the world we live in. You know, I have a brother who's severely mentally disabled. Did you know that? And he was mentally disabled because when he was 15 years old, he was out driving with his friends, and the driver made a mistake, pulled in front of a transport truck, immediately killed the two boys on the one side of the car, gone, 14 and 15 years old, 14 and 16, I think. My brother was hit in the head so hard by the kid beside him that he's permanently brain damaged. Can't walk properly, will never marry, his one eye goes out, he can't use his right arm very well, his right leg. It was a trying time. 2 people were killed. One person's life was irreversibly changed. Now, I could say to you, do you love your neighbor? Shame on you for driving. Shame on you for ever getting in your car. Shame on you for ever using the public highways again. Do you love your neighbor? Shame on you for doing that. You're putting people's lives at risk. When you drove to church today, there was a potential you could have killed somebody. You could have got killed yourself. Shame on you. Love your neighbor. This is the rhetoric we hear in our culture and society. And it's all in response to this basic notion, well, whatever the government says, we should do. Folks, let me just share a few things with you. Life is about risk and reward. It's about risk and reward. The reason why we risk our lives in the highways is because there's reward attached to it. We actually run the numbers and say the chances are I'm going to make it there. The chances are I'm going to be okay. The chances are we're going to get through this. We're not going to shutter all businesses and close down churches and leave people feeling desperate and isolated just in case. We understand this. But in this current circumstance, people seem to have forgotten it. And with regard to shutting down the churches, let me just say this to you. We're not a local charity. We're not a local business. The government has no authority over our church. The Church of Jesus Christ predates Western culture by centuries. The government has no authority, direct authority over our church, unless, of course, we're engaged in criminal behavior, like letting kids be abused or killing people or child sacrifices or something like that. And if the government comes to us and says, you know what, things are bad, things are tough, we need your help, well then ask. Don't dictate, don't order, ask. We're reasonable people. Have a conversation with us and make your case. It's not my responsibility to prove to you that my church should be open for business. It's your responsibility to prove to me that if I open my church, people are going to die. High numbers of people are going to die. Another thing you should be aware of is how naive this arbitrary distinction is between essential and non-essential services. We see that. Well, you're essential, you're not. One of the things I just found so absurd under the lockdown, which a lot of Christians didn't want to say anything about. Oh, we got to keep LCBO open. But we're going to close down churches. We wouldn't want people who have substance addictions to go without. But we're okay letting marriages fall apart. We're okay letting people get back into drug use, pornographic addiction, because they got nothing better to do and they're at home and they're not being paid. And this is the kind of messages we get from the government. Think of how absurd this is. Well, you don't have to work because we're going to pay you. If you can't earn enough money, we're going to give you the money. It's like, okay, just a second. Where does that money come from? It comes from us. The government doesn't have a money tree. Now, all of this might sound uber political to you, but the reason why I mention it is because what I'm increasingly understanding as I get older is all politics is actually theology. All politics is theology. Because it all flows from either a recognition of God's law, a twisting of God's law, a partial recognition of God's law, or obedience to God's law. So this notion that somehow we come to church and we just talk theology and then we go into the public sphere and do politics, that's a false dichotomy and we need to wake up. We could talk about motives. We could talk about the fact that we live in a culture that actually invites opposition. We have an official opposition on a provincial level, an official opposition on a federal level. Our governmental systems actually invite feedback and opposition and criticism. It is not un-Christian to criticize the government. It's actually very Canadian and very patriotic to submit to the government while at the same time resisting and opposing the government. So when do I submit? What do I do with Romans 13? Well, we submit to all laws that do not violate God's moral and natural law. But I'm going to tell you there's very few laws these days that don't have some bearing on moral or natural law.